think I'm bound by lies? Clint growled, blood dripping from his hand as Claire's blade gleamed under the oil lamp. I'm bound by honor. He saved her life in the desert. She led him straight into a trap. But what they didn't count on was his past, his pain, and his code. This is the true story of Gunsmoke and Deception. The rider who saved her, the woman who betrayed him. True Wild West Stories invites you to listen closely, because not all heroes ride away unscathed. The scream tore through the heat like a bullet through still air, sharp, desperate, real. Clint Marlowe pulled the reins, and his mare, a dusty chestnut with a streak of sweat down her neck, reared slightly. He narrowed his eyes against the glare of the sinking sun, searching. Somewhere past the ridge of redstone and sagebrush, trouble was happening. Real trouble. The stink of hot leather and horse sweat hung in the air, mingling with the copper tang of dry blood and the sharp scent of gun oil.
Clint had smelled that cocktail too many times not to know what came next. As his boots dug into the stirrups, he leaned forward, whispering to the horse like an old friend. Let's see what the buzzards are circling for. Overhead, a pair of vultures glided in slow, hungry loops. Nature's foreshadowing. He clicked his tongue, and they galloped hard, hooves pounding over cracked earth, scattering lizards and dust into the wind. A scream again, softer now, strained. Clint's hand slipped instinctively to the butt of his revolver. Then he saw them. 3 figures. 2 armed men, one tall with a yellow bandana, the other stocky and mean-looking, standing over a woman in torn clothing, her hands bound. The taller one raised his hand, the back of it swinging hard. Clint didn't wait. He fired once, clean. The tall one collapsed without a sound. The second turned, startled, and tried to draw, but Clint was already moving. Another shot. The man spun, hit in the leg, and hit the sand with a grunt. The third man, probably the lookout, took one glance at Clint and bolted into the scrub, disappearing between rocks before Clint could even draw a bead on him. The woman gasped, stumbling back, tripping over the hem of her dusty skirt. Her face was streaked with dirt, lips cracked from the heat, but her eyes were sharp and wary, even behind the fear. Clint approached cautiously. "You all right, ma'am?" She looked up, shaky but composed, as if she'd practiced fear. "If you hadn't shown up," her voice was dry as bone. "I thought they were going to kill me." Clint holstered his gun and took out his knife, kneeling beside her to cut the ropes binding her wrists. The rope fell to the sand. She massaged her hands slowly, eyes never leaving his face. "You got a name?" he asked, offering her a water flask. She hesitated. Claire Donovan. The name didn't ring any bells, and Clint didn't press. He handed her the canteen, watching her drink too fast and cough. "You traveling alone out here?" Claire nodded, too quickly. "Doesn't seem smart," Clint muttered, more to himself. She caught it. "My brother was with me. They took him. Said they'd come back for me after." Her eyes welled up then, just enough to be convincing. "I ran." He glanced down at the bodies cooling in the sun, the flies already circling. Something didn't sit right. She didn't look like someone who'd just been dragged across the desert. No bruises, no tears in the bindings. But then again, people were strange when they were scared. Clint looked away, jaw set. Come on. We should ride before night creeps in. She leaned on him as she stood, closer than necessary. Her perfume, faint but stubborn, fought with the dust and blood. Clint tried not to flinch. As they turned toward his horse, Claire touched his arm lightly, her voice dropping. If you hadn't come when you did, I'd be dead.
He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the doubt faded. Maybe she was just lucky. Or maybe he wasn't. The fire crackled low, throwing jagged shadows across the hard-packed earth. Claire sat curled close to the flame, her knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The cold of the desert night had crept in, quick, sharp, and dry, biting through the thin layers of fabric. Yet her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady, too steady for someone who'd nearly died hours before. They were following me for 2 days, she said, not looking at him. Thought I'd shaken them off in the canyon, but they were waiting. Clint sat across from her, one leg stretched out, the other bent beneath him. He poked at the fire with a charred stick, the embers flaring in protest. His eyes didn't leave the flames, but his ears took in every syllable. Claire's hands were trembling, though she tried to keep them still. Every so often her fingers brushed against the breast pocket of her coat, almost absent-mindedly, as if checking for something precious. She caught herself doing it and quickly folded her arms. Clint noticed. He noticed everything. The wind stirred, carrying with it the distant howl of a lone coyote. It echoed off the rocky slopes like a ghostly warning. Clint reached for the coffee pot warming by the fire, poured a little into a tin cup, and passed it across. She took it with a nod. Thanks. They sat in silence for a while, broken only by the wind and the spit of burning wood. Finally, Claire spoke again. There's something you need to know. Clint didn't answer, just waited. She hesitated, then pulled out a worn scrap of parchment from her coat pocket and laid it gently on the dirt between them. The firelight flickered across its faded ink and creased edges. This, she said, is a piece of something bigger. Clint raised an eyebrow. A map. From the war, she went on. My grandfather fought in the South. Before it ended, he and some other men buried a stash of gold, Confederate payroll, out here in Arizona. They split the map into 4 parts. This is one. Clint studied the scrap, not touching it. Looks old. It is. You got the rest? She shook her head. No, but I know where to start looking. Clint leaned back, arms crossed. And you want me to help you dig for ghosts. I want you to protect me, she said, at least until we find the second piece. Why me? Her eyes didn't flinch. Because you showed up today, when no one else would have. Because you can handle yourself, and because I don't trust anyone else. Clint let the silence stretch, watching her through the smoke. The fire popped. In the darkness beyond the ring of light, something scurried, maybe a rabbit, maybe not. He didn't believe in luck, never had. But something about Claire, her calm under pressure, the way she told her story without trembling too much, itched at the edge of his instincts. Maybe she was telling the truth, maybe not. But either way, she was bait. He sighed, rubbed the grit from his eyes, and nodded once. All right, I'll ride with you. Claire looked relieved, but only just. She reached forward and slowly folded the map, sliding it back into her pocket. Across the fire, Clint stared past her into the dark. He wasn't thinking about gold, not yet. He was thinking about a different fire, smaller, weaker, on a night long ago in a canyon like this. A young man, back then, too eager, too sure of who to trust. And it had nearly gotten him killed. But tonight, he wasn't that boy anymore.
He knew the rules now. Never trust a story told too well. The fire hissed. Claire leaned back against her saddle, eyes finally closing. Behind a jagged rock some 30 yards away, a silhouette shifted, watching. Silent. Patient. The wooden sign above the diner door creaked as it swung lazily in the wind. Paint flaked from its edges, the name barely legible anymore. Mary Ann's. But the smell leaking out from the cracked windows was warm and sweet, a promise in cinnamon and apple. Clint and Claire rode into Dry Creek just past noon. The town looked like it hadn't taken a deep breath in years. One main street, dust-choked and faded, ran between rows of sagging buildings. Horses were tied outside the saloon and the general store, but the air felt too still, as if the buildings themselves were waiting for something that would never come. A rusted sign above the saloon door read, "No gold lasts forever." Claire stared at it a second too long. "Friendly slogan," Clint muttered, tying off his horse. Inside the bar, the air was cool and dim, the scent of old whiskey soaking into the floorboards. Silas Quinn, the owner, was behind the counter polishing a glass that didn't need polishing. Mid-40s, thick mustache, silver chain at his vest pocket, and eyes that smiled but didn't mean it. "Well, hell," he said, arms wide as Clint stepped in. "If it ain't Clint Marlowe. Ain't seen you in a decade or more." Clint didn't answer right away. "Didn't expect to be remembered," Silas chuckled, motioning them over. "Hard man to forget. Who's your friend?" "Claire," Clint replied, short. Silas gave her a long look, polite but measured. "Well, Claire, welcome to Dry Creek. Drinks on me." They sat, the seats creaking under the weight of dust and memory. Claire kept close, scanning the bar like she was counting exits. Clint noticed Silas watching her, subtle, calculating, like he was appraising livestock, not guests. Across the street, Mary Ann's diner glowed soft and amber through old windows. Clint caught a whiff of something warm on the breeze and motioned Claire outside. The diner was brighter than the saloon, filled with the scent of baked apples and cloves. Mary Ann, a woman in her late 50s, with a no-nonsense bun and kind eyes, was setting out fresh slices of pie for a pair of old farmers in the corner. "Well, I'll be," she said, spotting Clint. "You look thinner." "You look busier," Clint replied, smiling. Mary Ann laughed. "Don't flatter me. I know this town's been dying slow, but a hot pie still means something, don't it?" She served them both without asking, the crust golden, the filling steaming. Claire took one bite and closed her eyes. For the first time since he met her, Clint saw something real in her expression, something soft. At the next table, an old man with yellowed teeth and a dusty hat was telling anyone who'd listen about his corn crop. "Came up sweet this year," he said, "not like last season. Rain's been kind." The place felt warm in a way Clint hadn't realized he missed. The scent of cinnamon, the creak of old floorboards. Laughter, not forced, but honest. It stirred something buried beneath grit and years. Then the door creaked open, and a shadow fell across the diner. Elias Carter stepped inside. He looked older but solid. Same sharp eyes, same squared jaw. A man who'd ridden long and fought hard, and still had fight left in him. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Clint. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Elias walked over, boots heavy against the floor. "Clint," he said, voice low. "Elias?" They didn't shake hands.
just studied each other like two hounds sniffing the wind. Elias glanced at Claire, then leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. Don't trust anyone in this town. Not even the ones who offer pie. Elias Carter sat on the edge of his porch, a worn-out blanket draped over one shoulder, the other bare to the evening wind. His pipe glowed faintly between cracked lips, thin wisps of smoke curling up into the fading sky. He didn't look at Clint, just stared out over the dry fields, stretching beyond the edge of town, where the desert swallowed the horizon in slow gulps of orange and red. Clint leaned against a rail post, arms folded, eyes narrowed. You always smoke that damn pipe when you're thinking, Clint said, half smirking. Elias didn't answer right away, just puffed once more and set the pipe down on the railing beside him. The old knife sat next to it, rusted now, with a chipped handle and dark stains along the blade. Clint's gaze lingered on it. That from Kansas? He asked. Elias nodded slowly. That one stayed with me, not because it was useful, because it reminds me. The wind picked up, warm and dry, lifting the dust and the scent of old sagebrush. Somewhere out near the edge of the fields, a crow called once, then fell silent. Clint shifted his weight, waiting. Elias finally spoke, voice low and steady. You remember Darby Rell? Clint nodded. Yeah, reckless bastard. Thought he was invincible. He died because I trusted the wrong man, Elias said flatly. We were supposed to hold the pass till backup came. But backup never came. Because the man I believed in sold us out for gold. He reached for the knife, turned it over in his hands like a relic from a church altar. 3 good men died that day. Darby, Lennox, and Nate. I buried them myself. Ground was too hard. Had to use the blade. Clint looked down, silent. Elias didn't stop. I made a choice that day. Never again would I let greed talk louder than my gut. Gold's a loud bastard. Makes men forget who they are. He turned, eyes now on Clint, sharp and knowing, like he could see the seams beneath the skin. So I'm asking you, Clint, you really believe that girl, Claire? Clint exhaled slowly. I don't know yet. Elias nodded like he expected the answer, but didn't like it. That map in her pocket. It ain't just ink and paper. It's a fuse. You light it. You better be damn sure where it leads, because it might not be gold waiting at the other end. Might be a grave. The 2 men sat in silence, the sky bleeding into violet and rust, the creak of the wood beneath them, the smell of smoke and sage. It all felt heavier than it should have, like the world was warning them in its own slow, patient way. Then, from the edge of the porch, a soft voice cut through the hush. I didn't mean to interrupt. They turned. Claire stood half in shadow, the last light catching in her hair. Her face was calm, but her eyes, those clever, unreadable eyes, held something new. Not surprise. Not fear. Knowledge. She'd heard the whole thing. Clint straightened slightly, reading her. Her arms were folded across her chest, chin tilted just enough to seem strong, not defensive. Elias didn't move, didn't apologize. He just looked at her and said, Hope you've got more than stories, miss. 'cause stories alone get folks killed. Claire didn't flinch. Then it's a good thing I have a map. A sharp clatter echoed off the canyon walls, a rock tumbling down from high above, crashing against the hard red stone. Dust exploded into the narrow trail, thick and choking, swallowing the sun in a cloud of grit. Clint yanked the reins hard, his horse rearing in protest. Behind him, Claire coughed, trying to shield her face with her sleeve. "Move," Clint barked, pulling her down from the saddle just as another rock slammed into the path where her horse had stood a second earlier. The canyon was alive now. Wind hissed through narrow cuts in the stone, carrying the bitter scent of rust, old iron, old blood. The air tasted of something gone wrong. Clint crouched low, eyes scanning the ridges. The red rock formations towered above them like jagged teeth, casting deep shadows that shifted with the wind. Something was up there, watching. "Stay close," he murmured, pulling his revolver from its holster. The metal was warm from the sun, the handle worn smooth from years of use. They had ridden into the canyon just after midday, hoping to shave time off their journey. Claire had said the map pointed through a narrow pass near the salt flats. Clint didn't like the terrain. Too many choke points, too many blind corners. But he had followed anyway. And now they were boxed in. A sharp whistle cut through the wind. Clint spun just in time to see movement, 3 shadows dropping from the ledge above, landing clumsily on the rocks below. Bandanas covered their faces, guns drawn, but their eyes were wild and uncertain, like they hadn't expected resistance. One raised his rifle. Clint fired first. The shot echoed like thunder. The man dropped with a grunt, blood dark against the dust. The second hesitated, then dove for cover behind a boulder. The third, a wiry figure with a crooked arm, charged forward, screaming. Claire stepped back, nearly slipping on loose gravel. Clint didn't miss, but in the chaos, one shot rang out from behind the boulder. It missed Clint by inches, ricocheting off the canyon wall. He ducked, dragged Claire behind a fallen log, heart pounding. And then, silence, except for the whimpering. The wounded man, the one Clint had shot first, was still alive. He crawled slowly, leaving a smear behind him. His rifle was out of reach. As Clint approached, the man looked up, blood in his teeth, fear in his eyes. "You're protecting her?" he spat. "You don't even know, do you?" Clint narrowed his eyes. "Know what?" The man laughed, weak and cracked. "She's the one. She's the one they follow? Your little treasure girl? She's the damn leader." Then his eyes rolled back and he went still. Clint stared down, stunned. The canyon felt colder suddenly. The dust settled, the wind faded, but his thoughts swirled like a kicked-up storm. Behind him, Claire stood very still. "You heard that," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was calm, too calm. He was delirious. "Dying men say all kinds of things." Clint turned, studying her. Her eyes didn't flinch. They were clear, steady, and cold. "You think I planned an ambush on myself? Let them try to kill me just to, what, test your loyalty?" she said flatly. "That's a hell of a gamble, Clint." He didn't reply. She stepped closer, brushing dust from her sleeve. "You've been in this world long enough to know men lie, especially when they're bleeding." The silence between them was louder than the wind. From the rocks nearby, a broken revolver lay forgotten, its barrel cracked. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of rusting iron and dried blood. Clint picked it up slowly. The weight of it, the smell, it all felt too real to ignore.
And yet, so did her eyes. Claire's smile was faint, almost dreamy, as she swirled the amber whiskey in her glass.
The flickering oil lamps caught the edges of her face, softening her sharp cheekbones, and giving her a warmth that, Clint suspected, had nothing to do with truth. She looked relaxed, too relaxed, like she'd played this scene before. The saloon in Dry Creek was loud tonight. Men shouted over a half-drunken card game in the corner. Smoke curled from cheap cigars, and someone strummed a half-hearted tune on a worn-out guitar that had lost one of its strings. The scent of whiskey, sweat, and spilt tobacco mixed into a stew that clung to the walls like old regrets. Clint leaned against the bar, his hand resting near the butt of his revolver, not because he felt in danger, but because the air had shifted. Something about tonight felt off. Maybe it was the way Claire hadn't flinched during the ambush. Maybe it was how calm she'd been since. Or maybe it was the fact her gun, polished, well kept, had never fired a shot. "You always drink that slow?" Clint asked, watching her. Claire shrugged, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's not about the drink. It's about the company." Silas, behind the bar, wiped a glass with a rag that only made it dirtier. He leaned in with his usual half-smirk, voice low. "You looking for a guide through them canyons, friend? I know a few routes even the sheriff forgot." Clint didn't respond right away. He just kept his gaze on Claire as she sipped. Silas didn't push, just gave a lazy nod and wandered down the bar to pour a drink for someone else. But minutes later, he slipped through a door behind the shelves. Upstairs, behind a splintered wall, Silas knelt beside a chest. Inside was a pouch of gold coins, old Confederate mint, worn but still valuable in the right circles. He counted them slowly, lips barely moving. "Eli's girl says they're heading south come dawn," he muttered. A shadow shifted behind him, a tall man with a scar down one cheek, dressed in trail dust and silence. "Same price," Silas added. "You get it done quiet. I don't care who pulls the trigger." Back downstairs, Elias Carter stood near the saloon entrance. He didn't order a drink. Instead, he crouched near the doorframe, rubbing something into the wood. White chalk, barely visible in the flicker of lanterns. A quiet mark, a signal only an old soldier would recognize. Then he melted back into the shadows, unnoticed. Clint sat at a table now, Claire across from him. The din of the bar pressed in on them, a world too loud to hear lies clearly. "So," she said, setting her glass down, "you still think I planned that ambush?" Clint didn't answer, not directly. "I think you talk fast, shoot slow, and lie just enough to make me wonder what's real." Claire's expression didn't change. "And I think you've seen enough betrayal to trust no one." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your gun's clean, barrel's cold, trigger untouched." Her jaw tensed, just a fraction. "I carry it for protection, not war." "You've been chased, hunted, nearly killed, but never fired back?" "I don't shoot unless I have to." Clint studied her. "You haven't had to. That's what bothers me." For the first time, her smile faded. "Maybe," she said softly, "I'm not the one who should be afraid." They sat in silence after that, the tension between them like a third presence at the table. The guitar twanged off-key. A drunk knocked over his stool and cursed. Smoke curled toward the rafters. And upstairs, Silas tied off the pouch of gold, slipping it back beneath a floorboard. He lit a match, let it burn to his fingertips, then snuffed it with a grin. "Fools," he muttered, standing. The coin still jingled in his pocket as he looked out over the saloon floor from the top of the stairs, eyes cold, calculating. Moonlight spilled across the canvas of the old map, casting silver over the curling edges and worn creases. The ink was faint in places, but the landmarks, ridges, ravines, rock formations, stood out just enough to trace the route with a finger. Claire sat close to the fire, her boots tucked beneath her, her eyes catching the flicker of flame and light. She leaned in and whispered, "That ridge, here, they say it glows at sunset. And beyond it, if the stories are true, there's a cave with walls of quartz and a floor of gold dust." Her voice held the kind of awe a child might have for fairy tales, but Clint wasn't buying wonder anymore. Not completely. He nodded, quiet, as he folded the map and slipped it back into the leather pouch hidden beneath his saddle blanket. Close, but not too close. "Thanks," Claire said softly, "for not asking too many questions." Clint poked at the fire, stirring embers into a short-lived dance. "I figure the questions'll answer themselves, sooner or later." The night was still around them, save for the occasional hiss of the fire and a distant coyote's cry. Claire hugged her coat closer, her shoulders brushing his as she scooted nearer to the warmth. "I know what you're thinking," she said, "that I'm not telling you everything." "You're right," Clint replied, "but I don't think anyone ever does." She tilted her head, pretending to be amused, but Clint caught the tension in her jaw, the way her hand drifted toward her coat pocket like a reflex. Maybe to check if what she was hiding was still there. It wasn't the first thing that didn't add up. Earlier that day, as they passed the outskirts of Dry Creek, Clint had noticed something curious. Chalk markings etched into an old oak, hidden from the casual eye. 3 short lines and a curved slash. Elias Carter's mark. A warning. And it pointed west, but Claire's route veered south. Her map supported it. Her story demanded it. And Clint? Clint had lived too long and seen too much to trust a straight line through a crooked tale. He let the silence settle between them. The fire cracked again, throwing shadows that danced along the sagebrush and the nearby rocks. Somewhere behind them, the horses shifted, restless. Claire tossed another stick into the flames. "You ever think about what you'll do when this is over? When we find it?" "Gold's like a rattlesnake," Clint muttered. "Shiny, but it'll bite you clean through if you don't watch where you step." "I mean it," Claire said, voice softening. "You could start over. New place, new name. Forget whatever it is you're running from." Clint didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped square of cornbread, stale but still scented faintly with cinnamon and maize. Mary Ann had packed it into his kit that morning without saying a word, just a look and a nod. The kind of gesture you got from someone who knew how short peace could be. He broke it in half, handed a piece to Claire. She took it, eyes flicking toward him. Then toward the saddle where the map had disappeared. She didn't ask questions. He liked her better when she did. Minutes passed. The fire dwindled. Clint's eyes swept the ridge above them, the edges of the camp. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage, dust, and something else. Hoofbeats, soft at first, then clearer. Clint froze, his hand drifting toward his holster. A shadow flitted across the rocks behind them. Another moved near the horses. Claire's head turned just as he stood. "Someone's here," Clint said, voice flat. He stepped away from the fire, boots crunching on gravel. Claire stayed low, watching the dark. Her eyes didn't widen with fear. That, more than anything, told Clint the danger wasn't new to her. "Who is it?" she whispered. Clint didn't reply. He already knew the answer, not the name maybe, but the shape of the game.
Someone didn't want them reaching the next ridge. Morning light cut into the canyon like a blade, a thin beam glancing off the jagged walls of red rock. Dust hung in the cool air, glittering faintly where the sun struck it. Clint guided his horse forward, boots creaking in the stirrups, scanning the narrow path ahead. It was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the muffled echo of hooves against stone. Behind him, Claire rode with her back straight, her expression unreadable. She had been silent since they broke camp, eyes fixed on the trail, lips pressed into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so cold. Clint noticed, but said nothing. The canyon narrowed to a choke point, the walls pressing in until the sky was just a strip of blue overhead. The air smelled of iron and damp stone, and every sound seemed louder. Snorts of the horses, the scrape of hooves against loose gravel, Clint's own breathing. Something shifted above, a faint cough of gravel sliding down. Clint's hand twitched toward his revolver. "Wait," Claire said softly. "We're almost there." Her tone was different, calm, practiced, like she was guiding him, not asking. They rounded a bend and stopped. Men appeared on the ledges above, rifles slung, faces masked with bandanas. More stepped out from behind boulders ahead, blocking the path. Horses whinnied, hooves striking sparks on the stone. The air filled with the smell of sweat and rusted metal. Clint cursed under his breath, scanning for an opening. There was none. He looked at Claire. She was no longer looking at him. She was dismounting, slow and deliberate, her boots crunching on the gravel. When she turned, her eyes were colder than the morning wind. "Thank you, Clint," she said, her voice carrying easily in the still canyon. "You've been exactly what we needed." He felt the words like a gut punch. "We?" Her smile now was sharp. "You brought us through the worst of it, right to the place we couldn't reach on our own." The men above shifted, rifles aimed, horses stamped nervously, the echoes of their movements bouncing off the canyon walls like a drumbeat. Clint's hand tightened on his revolver, but he didn't draw. Not yet. "You set me up," he said quietly. "You set yourself up," she replied. "All I did was give you a story to believe." Wind whistled through a crack in the rocks, making a sound like a whispering crowd. Clint's heart beat hard but slow, his mind working even as the noose closed. "You think you've got everything," he said. "I know I do," she said, stepping back toward the nearest bandit. "The map, the path, the gun at my side." Her words echoed, swallowed by the canyon. Clint glanced at her saddlebag, empty. His eyes narrowed. She hadn't noticed. He had kept the map on him the entire ride, her one mistake. Around them, the men shifted closer, their boots grinding into gravel. A horse reared, its whinny shrill and panicked, the sound ricocheting off the canyon walls and blending with the low, mournful howl of the wind. The smell of rusted guns and sweat filled Clint's lungs. Claire's gaze flicked to his hand on the revolver, but she didn't look worried. "Don't," she said softly. "Not yet." Clint's jaw tightened. "You're not as clever as you think." "Maybe," she said, "but I'm clever enough to bring you here." And then she gave a signal, a small flick of her fingers. The circle closed. Clint's thumb brushed the edge of the folded map inside his coat. Her mistake burned in his mind like a brand. Dust exploded in thick clouds as the first shot rang out, sharp, deafening, its echo bouncing off the red stone like a thunderclap. Clint dropped low behind a jagged boulder, his breath ragged, chest heaving. Another shot cracked overhead, sending a shower of pebbles cascading down the rock face.
The canyon had turned into a hellish echo chamber, every shot multiplied, amplified, shaking the ribs like drumbeats of war. Claire's horse, startled by the blast, reared up with a scream and tore free, yanking the reins from her hand. Its hooves skittered against the stone. Then it vanished into the narrow bend behind them, its yoke flapping wildly. The empty saddle bounced with every stride, the image seared into Clint's mind. She didn't even flinch. Claire stood outside the ring of dust and chaos, eyes locked on him, not angry, not panicked, just waiting, like a gambler watching dice in the air. Clint wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve, which was already soaked. He tugged off his coat, flung it wide, and slammed it down into the dust. Instantly it kicked up a haze. Using it as cover, he dove left toward a cluster of rocks, rolled, and came up behind a dead tree trunk. Gunfire spat toward the coat's landing spot, missing him by inches. He fired 2 quick rounds. One slammed into a rock, the other made a bandit duck behind a ledge. The revolver's grip was slick in his hand, the heat of the barrel biting into his skin. He was outnumbered, pinned, and running out of tricks. A sharp sting ripped through his left arm. The impact spun him half around. For a second he didn't feel it, just a shock, a strange sense of pressure. Then came the burn, deep and spreading. Blood bloomed down his sleeve, dark red against dusty denim, dripping onto the wooden grip of his revolver. Clint gritted his teeth and ducked lower. He pressed his forearm tight against his ribs to slow the bleeding, but every breath jolted pain through his shoulder. A rifle barked nearby. Shards of rock flew from the cliff behind him. The bandits were closing in. His good arm trembled from the recoil, the weight of his own blood pulling on his balance. Another round sang past his head, close enough to feel the heat of its passage. He reloaded with shaking fingers, his mind racing, trying to count enemies and guess where the next shot would come from. Then, a glint. Above, on the ridge, the sun caught something metal, clean, bright, almost silver. A flash. Bang! One of the bandits on the ledge jerked backward, arms flailing as he tumbled off the rock. His body thudded hard onto the canyon floor, raising another puff of dust. The others froze. Even Clint did. Up on the cliff, silhouetted against the harsh morning light, stood a figure, tall, unmoving, the barrel of a long silver rifle still raised. Smoke curled from the muzzle like breath in cold air. Elias. His old hat shadowed most of his face, but there was no mistaking the man. The silver rifle gleamed like something out of legend, clean, deadly, precise. His presence was like a ghost from another time, stepping back into the fire. Another shot rang out. Another bandit down. Clint forced himself upright, blood slicking his hand, pain like fire across his arm. But his eyes were locked on Claire now. She wasn't watching the dead men. She was watching Elias. And for the first time, she looked unsure. Overhead, a dark shadow circled, wide wings, slow and deliberate. The vultures had come lower now, gliding over the canyon floor as if they knew what was coming next. Clint shifted his stance, winced, but raised his revolver again. This wasn't over. Anybody else feel lucky? Elias's voice, low and weathered, cut through the gunfire like an axe through dry wood. He stood tall atop the ridge, his silhouette clear against the midday sun. The silver barrel of his long rifle glinted like a righteous blade, and hanging against his chest, catching the sunlight, was an old brass sheriff's whistle, dented, worn, but still whole. A memory of another life, when law held weight and men were held to their word. Below, Clint pressed his back to the canyon wall, his wounded arm tucked in, jaw clenched against the pain. Dust clung to his bloodied shirt. Sweat stung his eyes. Every breath tasted of copper and grit. He could barely lift his revolver, but he didn't lower it. Not now. Shots cracked again. Elias had fired. One of the bandits yelped, spun, and dropped, clutching his leg. The rest hesitated, caught between fear and greed. Claire had moved to the side, far from the fray. No longer the trembling woman Clint had found in the desert. She stood straight, arms folded, expression unreadable. No gun in hand, no plea on her lips. Just that cold calm he'd begun to suspect was her true face. Clint saw it clearly now. She'd never been scared. Elias moved like a man half his age, leaping down from the ledge with practiced agility. His boots slammed into the ground with the finality of a gavel. He advanced without pause, firing only when needed. Each shot disciplined, each step declaring authority. One bandit tried to rush him from the side. Elias didn't flinch. He turned slightly, leveled the rifle, and with one thunderous shot, the man dropped, face first, into the dust. Another shot rang out behind him, from Clint, who had found the strength to cover his flank. Side by side they stood, old and wounded, young and bleeding, both scarred in their own ways, both unwilling to bend. "You think we're done?" barked the bandit lieutenant, a burly man with a twisted smile and a scar running from temple to chin. "There's more of us than you." Elias stepped forward, raised his rifle, and called out, "Honor doesn't go out of style, son. It just gets buried under cowards like you." With one sharp pull of the trigger, Elias ended the man's grin. The body dropped with a thud, his revolver clattering uselessly beside him. For a moment, silence reigned. Even the wind seemed to pause. Claire didn't move. Elias lowered his rifle slowly. "You still trust her?" he asked Clint without turning. "'Cause I damn sure wouldn't." Before Clint could answer, a slow clap echoed from the shadows near the canyon's bend. Silas. He emerged with that ever-present crooked smile, a gold tooth catching the sun. His hands were empty, but something in his eyes gleamed dangerous. "Well now," he said casually, stepping over a fallen body. "I always enjoy a good show, and this one's been downright biblical." Clint's grip on his revolver tightened, though he barely had the strength to lift it. Elias shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. Claire didn't even glance at Silas, her attention still locked on Clint, lips parted as if trying to find the right lie. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, and somewhere above, the brass whistle along Elias's chest swayed gently in the heat, a ghost of the law still hanging on. Through the haze of gunsmoke and dust, a white cloth waved lazily in the wind. Silas stepped forward, calm as a man strolling through a Sunday market, not a battlefield. His boots crunched over shell casings and bloodied stone. He held the handkerchief aloft like a showman's flourish, grinning wide under his weathered hat. "Well now," he drawled,
that gold tooth of his flashing with every word. Ain't this a picture? Dust, drama, and dead men. But I reckon it's time we all put the guns down and talk like civilized folks. Elias didn't move. His rifle was steady, leveled at Silas's chest. Clint, still leaning against a rock, watched with narrowed eyes, blood drying stiff down his arm. Claire stood between them all, arms folded, unreadable. Silas took another step, raising both hands now. A breeze tore through the canyon, lifting the edge of his coat, and for a moment, something peeked from the inner pocket. A notebook, its corner curled and stained. Clint's eyes locked on it. Silas caught the look and chuckled. "Ah, I see you noticed my little black book. Ledger, actually. Just debts and promises. Mostly promises, really." He pulled it from his coat with theatrical care and flipped it open. "See here?" He thumbed through pages. "Darn near every name in Dry Creek's in here. Folks owe me for flour, water, medicine, even a wedding dress or two. I keep people afloat." Clint stepped forward, ignoring the throb in his arm. He snatched the book from Silas's hand. Names, dozens, written in tight, crabbed handwriting. Next to each, a debt. A gallon of kerosene, a day's worth of water, a sack of cornmeal, and then, at the bottom of every page, a signature. Mary Ann, Old Tom, the blacksmith, even Elias's late brother. Claire peered over Clint's shoulder. Her voice was low. "So this is how you bought the town?" Silas smiled wider. "I prefer the word invested. I help folks when they're low. All I ask in return is a little loyalty, a little flexibility." Elias stepped forward, rifle rising to point squarely between Silas's eyes. "You bastard," he muttered. "You've been bleeding Dry Creek dry while feeding us tall tales about survival and community." Silas didn't blink. The town needed leadership. I provided it. And now, with the gold you folks kindly uncovered, I can finally buy back the water reservoir from those city folk. Keep the taps running. Keep the kids drinking. Hell, maybe even pave the damn road. Claire's voice was sharper now. "You want the gold to lock this town tighter in your grip." Silas shrugged. "Call it what you want, but I'm the only one with a plan." Elias didn't lower the gun. "You're also the only one who's been playing both sides," Clint said, still clutching the ledger. "Selling out townsfolk, feeding info to bandits, using Claire, using me." Silas chuckled again, the sound oily and amused. Now, no need to take it personal. We all lie when we have to. Even you, cowboy. You didn't tell her who you really were either, did you?" Elias took a step closer. The tension in the air was thick enough to bite. "I should put you in the ground for what you've done," Elias growled. Silas didn't move. "Maybe. But then who's going to explain to the 30 armed men I called in from Larkspur why you're holding the only thing that can save their thirsty families?" Clint froze. "What did you say?" Silas smiled wide, slow and cruel. "I said," he repeated, "I already sent for reinforcements." And then the sound reached them, faint but unmistakable. Hooves. Multiple sets, coming fast from the east. From the crest of the hill, a line of riders appeared, shadows at first, then shapes, then men. Dust boiled behind them, rising like smoke from hell itself. Sunlight bounced off rifle barrels and belt buckles, and the thunder of hooves began to shake the dry earth beneath Clint's boots. Elias cursed under his breath. "They came faster than I figured."
Clint didn't answer. His eyes locked onto the distant riders, at least 24, maybe more, and leading them, without the faintest hint of shame, was Claire. She rode tall in the saddle, beside Silas, who held the reins with one hand and a battered flip phone in the other, its back cover flapping loosely. The betrayal had a modern stench. So much for legends of outlaws and honor. Now they had burner phones and promises traded like currency. On a nearby post, faded red paint marked a rough X, a signal, no doubt, guiding the riders across the parched wasteland. Clint's jaw clenched. Every move had been mapped out, every rock and ridge used to funnel them like cattle. "We ride," Elias growled. They turned without another word, kicking up a fresh wave of dust as their horses thundered westward, away from the ridge, away from Dry Creek. Behind them, gunfire erupted, cracking through the heat like lightning strikes. Bullets bit at the sand around them, kicking up plumes. Clint rode low, arm wrapped tight across his wound, reins gripped in his good hand. Elias was just ahead, rifle bouncing across his back, eyes sharp. They weaved between jutting rocks and dried-out brush, the desert stretching endlessly, shimmering under the sun's fury. Then, a sharp cry, hooves stumbling. Elias's horse lurched. The old man's body jerked in the saddle before tumbling hard to the ground. He hit with a bone-jarring thud, dust exploding around him. Clint wheeled back, heart pounding. Elias clutched his thigh, blood pouring through his fingers, a dark red bloom spreading fast. "Keep going," Elias barked, voice rough but clear. "Take the damn map." Clint jumped from his horse, crouched beside him. "Not leaving you. You will if you want any of this to matter." Elias's eyes blazed. "You think they're after me? Hell no. They want the map. They want Dry Creek. You keep riding." Gunfire drew closer. A bullet whined past, chipping stone inches from Clint's head. Elias shoved the worn leather satchel into Clint's chest. "I've made my peace. Don't let this place die a lie." Clint hesitated, eyes burning. "Go!" Elias roared. And Clint did. He swung into the saddle, kicked his horse hard, and took off into the inferno. Behind him, the last thing he saw was Elias propped against a boulder, rifle across his lap, defiant even as the riders crested the ridge. Claire watched him go. She didn't shout, didn't lift her gun, just stared after him with eyes like polished glass, cold, reflective, unreadable. Silas beside her was already barking orders, the phone pressed to his ear, though the plastic back now dangled by a thread. Signals in the desert. Modern ghosts. The riders split. Some stayed behind to surround Elias. Others followed the lone figure now vanishing into the shimmering heat. Clint leaned low, urging the horse faster, the satchel thudding against his side. Dust swallowed him. The sun beat down like judgment, and his shadow, long stretched thin across the burning sand, was all that remained visible as he rode deeper into the unknown. Clint collapsed just as the screen door creaked open. His body hit the wooden step with a dull thud, blood soaking into the thin layer of sand and grit that always clung to the doorway of Mary Ann's diner. The lights inside were dim, casting long shadows across the checkerboard floor, and the old radio on the counter crackled softly halfway through Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire.
The music bled into the quiet night like memory. Mary Ann stood still for a heartbeat, her apron stained with coffee and grease, hands frozen mid-wipe with a dish towel. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the blood, then the familiar face behind it. "Lord Almighty," she whispered. With a strength no one ever gave her credit for, she stooped, looped her arms under Clint's, and hauled him inside. He groaned but didn't resist, half-conscious and shivering. She dragged him past the empty booths, past the clock that hadn't worked in 6 years, and into the back room. She laid him out on a worn table once used for dough. The smell of old flour clung to the air, along with something sharper now: iron, sweat, and desperation. "Don't you die here," she muttered, grabbing a bottle of whiskey from beneath the counter. "Not in my kitchen." His shirt was a mess of torn fabric and dried blood. She cut it away with a steak knife, exposing the wound. Raw and angry, the bullet long gone but the damage clear. Without ceremony, she poured the whiskey over it. Clint hissed, tried to rise, but she pressed a firm hand to his chest. "Lie still. You've had worse." She reached for her fishing kit, a small tackle box she kept near the back door. From it she pulled a spool of thick fishing line and a curved needle. Her hands didn't shake. She'd stitched worse things than flesh: canvas, saddle straps, even the belly of a wild dog once. "Most men scream," she said, threading the needle. "You just grunt. That's either brave or stupid." Clint winced but didn't speak. His jaw was tight, eyes staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above. The stitches came fast and clean, though each one felt like fire. When it was done, Mary Ann poured another splash of whiskey on it for good measure, then leaned back with a sigh. "You owe me a shirt," she said. Clint gave a weak chuckle. "Add it to my tab." She sat beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. Outside, the wind whispered down Main Street. Inside, the air smelled of black coffee, whiskey, and the sharp tang of antiseptic. "Why'd you come back here?" she asked after a while. Clint hesitated, then, quietly, "I didn't know where else to go." Mary Ann nodded. "That's how most men end up here." He shifted, pain racking his face. "Elias, he didn't make it." She didn't react, just stared at the floor a moment, then said, "He was a good man." One of the last. Clint swallowed hard. The pain in his side was nothing compared to what swelled in his chest. He looked at her, eyes wet. "I'm tired, Mary Ann. Tired of being used. Of always wondering who's lying and who's about to stick a knife in my back." She poured them both a cup of coffee and handed him one. "Then stop running. Sit still long enough to see who stays." Clint blinked, the bitterness of the coffee grounding him. "You ever been used?" She smiled, bitter and sad. "My husband once sold everything we had to chase a gold vein that turned out to be fool's gold. Left me with a shack and a baby on the way. I've seen worse than this." The silence stretched. Then Clint leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head hanging low. For the first time in a long time, he let himself cry. Not out of weakness, but weariness. Mary Ann didn't say anything. She just let him sit there, the kind of silence only people who've seen too much can share. Outside, a shadow moved past the frosted window. Quick, almost imperceptible. A flash of long hair, a figure cloaked in the dark. Claire. But by the time Clint looked up, the street was empty again. The front door creaked open, slow and deliberate. A gust of dry wind followed behind, sending a ripple through the flame of the oil lamp and rustling the pages of a newspaper on the counter. Clint looked up from his cup of black coffee, and Marianne turned from the stove. Claire stood in the doorway, but not as they'd seen her before. No dirt smudged her cheeks, no tremble in her voice, no tears in her eyes. She wore a long, dark duster that fell to her boots. A gold chain glinted at her throat, half hidden beneath her collar. The pendant was small, but unmistakable. A crude emblem carved into it. The same symbol Clint had seen etched into the barrels of rifles used by the gang in the canyon. Her eyes met his, calm, unreadable, and cold. "I was hoping you'd be here," she said, stepping inside and latching the door behind her. Her voice no longer carried the soft tremor of a victim, but the clipped, commanding tone of someone used to obedience. Marianne took a step forward. "What is this?" Claire didn't answer. She walked past the booths, slow, measured. The old clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second like a nail driven into wood. She stopped just a few feet from Clint and reached beneath her coat. Out came a revolver, not trembling in her grip, not shaky from fear, but level and practiced. "Put the map on the table." Clint didn't flinch. He stared at her, jaw tight. "So that's it, huh? No more games," she said. "You've run long enough." Marianne took a breath, her voice low. "You were never in danger, were you?" Claire glanced at her. "I was exactly where I needed to be." The words hung in the room like smoke. Clint's hand hovered near his belt but didn't move. Marianne's face twisted with something deeper than anger. All these years, folks still dying for scraps of gold they'll never live long enough to spend. Claire's gaze softened just for a heartbeat, but she caught herself. The edge returned. "Give me the map, Clint, or I swear I'll put a bullet in your other arm." Clint's laugh was dry, humorless. "You've had every chance to kill me, Claire. In the canyon, at the fire, on the trail. You didn't. Why now?" "I was trying not to make it personal," she said, "but you made it that way when you ran." He stood slowly, the chair legs scraping across the floor. The oil lamp flickered as he stepped closer. Claire tensed, gun still trained on him. Clint didn't raise his hands. He didn't back down. "You think I'm just some fool who'd hand over everything 'cause you smiled at me," he said, voice low, raw. "You think I'm still that man from the desert? Beaten, lost, looking for something to believe in?" Claire's jaw tightened. "You're not in charge here," Clint continued. "Not anymore. And I'm done being played." Marianne stepped between them, arms out. "No one's dying in my diner." Claire didn't lower the gun, but she didn't fire either. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the old clock, counting down to something neither of them could name. Clint's eyes locked on Claire's. "You think I'm bound by your lies?" His voice was steel now. "Well," he said, stepping even closer, "then you don't know me at all." The gunshot cracked like thunder. A glass shattered on the counter, its shards sparkling mid-air before plattering to the floor. The quiet of Marianne's diner evaporated in an instant, replaced by chaos. Clint dove behind a table just as another shot splintered the edge of the booth where he'd stood seconds before. Marianne screamed and ducked beneath the counter, her hands trembling around a cast-iron skillet she hadn't used for cooking in years. Claire stood by the door, eyes wide and wild, a revolver still smoking. Behind her, Silas cursed and kicked over a chair, fumbling for his own weapon. The room became a storm. Tables flipped, dishes crashed, wood splintered. Clint grabbed a chair by the leg and hurled it toward Claire. It spun mid-air, forcing her to duck, buying him a moment. He rolled across the floor, grabbing the edge of the long serving table for cover, heart hammering in his chest. Another shot rang out, not from Claire. From the doorway, Elias stumbled in, half dragging a bleeding leg behind him. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with fury. The old sheriff's badge glinted dully on his coat. The rifle in his hands roared, and a bullet slammed into the wall beside Silas's head. "Still breathing, damn it," Elias grunted. "Let's finish this." Claire screamed and fired again, this time wild, unthinking. Her bullets tore through the pie display, exploded a jar of pickled onions, and sent flour puffing into the air like smoke. Clint moved. He surged forward, grabbed a fallen bench for cover, and advanced towards Silas, who, true to character, had begun slinking toward the kitchen exit. The weasel's eyes darted, calculating. His fingers reached inside his coat for what Clint didn't know, but it was too late. A shot from Clint's revolver sent Silas spinning backward. The man crashed into the stove, knocking over a skillet with a clang that echoed like a funeral bell. A ring of metal rolled on the floor, the old key to the water storage cellar, glinting beneath the haze of flour and smoke. Clint snatched it up just as Silas groaned and went still. "Got it," Clint muttered under his breath. But there was no time to breathe, no time to think. A flash of silver caught his eye. Claire. She had dropped her empty gun and drawn a knife, long and thin like a rattlesnake's fang. Her eyes were wild, her lips pulled into a grimace that might have been grief, might have been rage. Clint couldn't tell anymore. "You think this ends with him?" She spat, voice trembling with madness. "You think you can walk out of this with your honor intact?" Clint raised his weapon, but she was fast, too fast. She lunged, blade gleaming in the dim light, slicing through the dust-filled air. And the clock on the wall kept ticking, steady and indifferent, as blood, steel, and memory collided in the final act. The knife hit the wooden floor with a clatter. Claire collapsed beside it, her breath ragged, eyes fluttering in and out of consciousness. Blood pooled beneath her, mingling with the dust and spilled coffee. Outside, the wind howled through the shutters, pushing a chill into the bones of the battered diner. Clint stood over her, panting, blood from his own wounds soaking into the fabric of his shirt. He didn't speak. The silence between them was louder than any bullet. Claire reached out weakly, fingertips brushing the hem of his coat. Her lips trembled, forming a word that never found voice. Behind him, Elias groaned. Clint turned. The old man was propped against the overturned counter, his face pale as ash, one hand pressed to his side, where blood leaked freely between his fingers. Marianne knelt beside him, her hands stained red, her face unreadable. Clint dropped beside Elias, grabbing his wrist. "You hang on," he whispered. Elias gave a dry, broken chuckle. "No hanging on left in me, son. Just listen." His breath came shallow. "Gold, land, pride. They'll bury you same as they did my friends. But honor," he coughed hard, a wet, rattling sound. "Honor's the only thing that stays behind. That's the inheritance, Clint. Not treasure, not revenge, just honor." Clint nodded, jaw clenched. "I hear you." Elias's eyes slipped shut, a long exhale, then silence. Clint sat back, shoulders sagging. His gaze wandered to the corner of the room, where the map had fallen during the struggle. its edges curled, singed slightly from the ember that had popped from the stove. The parchment fluttered in the breeze like it knew what was coming. He picked it up slowly, weighed it in his calloused hand. Claire stirred behind him. Her voice was faint but clear. "I didn't want it to end like this," she said. "It wasn't always about gold." Clint didn't turn around. He walked to the fireplace, the map still in his grip. Marianne looked up. "Clint?" He didn't speak. The map caught fire easily, dry parchment, old ink. Flames consumed it hungrily, licking up the secrets of valleys, rivers, and half-buried dreams. The colors danced in his eyes, golden red, like all the promises that had led them to this blood-stained morning. Claire gasped, a sound between heartbreak and finality, as the map crumbled into ash. The room filled with the scent of burnt paper, bitter and earthy, merging with the lingering aroma of stale coffee and cold grease from the night's meal. It smelled real, like endings should. Clint turned away from the fire. He walked past Claire, who no longer had the strength to stop him, past Marianne, who watched him with a deep, weary understanding. He pushed the diner door open, letting the desert wind cut through the thick, heavy air. Outside, his horse waited, patient and silent. He mounted with a groan, his ribs still ached, and pulled his coat tighter against the wind. Marianne stepped into the doorway. "Where will you go?" Clint adjusted his hat, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Where the dust settles." He tapped his heel, and the horse moved. As he rode away, the wind picked up behind him, swirling the ashes of dreams and betrayal into the morning sky. The red dirt of Dry Creek clung to his boots, but his shadow stretched ahead, long, lean, and free. And somewhere in the distance, the desert howled its eternal song. Sometimes it's not the bullets that hurt the most. It's the betrayal of someone you trusted with your life. In the burning dust of Dry Creek, Clint chose honor over greed and truth over temptation. What's left behind isn't gold, but a lesson that echoes far deeper. People may lie, but character never does. In a world chasing quick riches, this story reminds us that what we stand for is worth more than what we chase. So let me ask you, would you rather die with gold in your hand or peace in your soul? If this story made you feel something, even for a moment, leave a 1 in the comments. Which state are you watching this from? Let us know. Got a different take on Clint's decision? We'd love to hear it. And if you enjoy gripping stories of betrayal, redemption, and the untamed West, subscribe to True Wild West Stories so you never miss what's coming next.